As Jay pointed out, it's less about the technology and it's more about people. So I'd like to start with a story about Dorothy Tillman. Dorothy cared so much about her aunt's personal health records, her information, that she got arrested for it. And this is her being booked in the Montgomery jail. This is a real story from 2008. So what happened? Dorothy grew up in Montgomery, Alabama, and she is known as a civil rights activist, as an alderwoman in the Chicago area. She was back in Montgomery, the year was 2008, and she took her Aunt Mabel, who was 86, to the local hospital emergency room on a Saturday evening. They spent the night there, going through tests, and as she described it, minimal procedures. So put yourself in her shoes. It's now 6 in the morning on Sunday. You spent an entire night in the ER, and they want to send her home, and they say, well, there's nothing really we can do for her. And she demands or asks for the medical records. And back in 2008 and even today, that's a hard thing to do. And she said, no, I want my medical records. And a scuffle ensued. For those of you who are curious, there is a YouTube video of the emergency room waiting room and the security guard who comes out and pins her. But the story ends with Dorothy continuing to demand her aunt's medical records, the hospital unable to comply, security comes out, and she is arrested for criminal trespassing. So a number of lessons here, and I'll come back. The last slide addresses what happens here, and I'll come back with the punchline. But as I speak to audiences, there's a couple of lessons that I think come out in this story. One is, as patients, as consumers, I sense we can all understand her wanting to have the information that is in those medical records. She's just spent 12 hours there. She's lost a night's sleep. She wants to take her aunt somewhere else for treatment. There's information in those records. There's findings from the doctors. But the hospital's yeah buts, or yeah but we can't give you the records, and I've worked in the hospital world, we haven't had those finalized. They're not electronic. Every department has their own procedures. So realization one is, as a consumer, we can empathize and understand why she would want that information. And for those of us who work in the healthcare world, we're also empathetic that in the year 2008, and for the most part today, I still don't know exceptions. If you know of exceptions, please let me know. There's not a hospital in America that could have complied with that request back in 2008 to give her her medical records. Where this sets up the presentation is, I could give you a lot of logic, I could give you a lot of statistics, and eventually I will. But not today. What I want you to reach into is your own intuition, an understanding, a gut-level understanding that Dorothy had and that each of us has about the value of our personal health information. Now, I'm going to come back to this theme, and as I told you, I'll give you a little bit of a wrap-up. So let me give you a tour of where we're going to take this. My colleague, Shahid Shah, is not able to join us today. We've done this presentation previously at HIMSS, and it's updated. And so his thinking, and where you see red-colored slides, his logic. Shahid, for those of you who know him, is a really smart tech guy. He's a geek. And I am pretty comfortable with technology, but I work with companies around their business strategy, and I'm not a technical expert, so I'll be able to certainly give you the conclusions of Shahid, but I probably won't be able to give you some of the color. You'll have to ask him that tomorrow. So here's the tour. We're going to talk about the future of platforms. And to tie that back to Dorothy, that we'll make a case, number one, that platforms are not simply a nice to have, but they are a must have to be able to unleash the data and the power that is stored in that data. The current IT architecture just isn't going to get us there. Secondly, that platforms are complex. We'll paint you a picture of a mosaic as opposed to a photo that's clear as to how platforms are evolving in the marketplace, and we'll look at some of the key characteristics that you should be looking at as you try to understand the growth of platforms in today's healthcare market. Third, we'll talk about how platforms are opportunistic, where my dream, and I'm going to talk about a blog series that I've got in the works and a book, and it's really more also becoming my life's passion to explain the dream and the belief that where we've had a health system that is focused on hoarding data and keeping it within our boundaries of our organization, we're going to move to a system, and we are already, where the ethic and the business model will be sharing information. That's how we're going to create value. We're not going to see the resistance that we have today. What you're going to see is people pushing information, wanting you to have that information, and the business models that will support that. And finally, some action items, mostly Shahid stuff, of the technology issues, the legal issues. You'll probably be surprised to know you probably don't own or don't have the legal rights that you ought to have to the information the data that is in your information technology systems. A copy of this presentation is now up on my website. Through the wonders of automated technology, had that tweeted a couple of minutes ago to the hashtag. I wrote a blog article yesterday as I was driving I was taking BART. Slip of the tongue. But there is actually another self-deprecating article here, how intense I got into writing this. I was on BART, headed to San Francisco, and as I was writing on my computer, the next thing I knew, I looked up and I was in Oakland. So the good news there is BART doesn't charge you anything to take you back. It cost me about 20 minutes of time. And anyway, the presentation is available, and you can look at it. Okay, number one, this is kind of a logical. This is a logical argument about why we say platforms are a must-have and not just a nice-to-have. Okay, the term platform has many connotations, and I'm going to try and simplify this for you. The bottom left is the concept of a product platform, where you have the chassis of a car, and it's used for the sport utility vehicle, it's used for the light truck. Okay, that's not what we're talking about here. I want to label very clearly, we are not talking about product platforms, which has been a concept that's been around for all eternity. What we are talking about is products with open APIs and industry platforms. And I'll draw a picture of that for you. And the definition of platform is actually very straightforward. Okay, it has three elements. Okay, so you've got, number one is the platform itself. Okay, this is, think of your smartphone. It's the Apple operating system. It's the Android operating system. And then out here, you've got number two, which is the complementary components. And then, very importantly, number three is right here, the API, the interface. This API is a pipeline where two systems can exchange data. And it is a technological concept. Most people tend to think of the word platform as a technological concept. As Shahid and I use it, we use it much more broadly. It's not only a reference to the technological architecture, but it's also a reference to the business ecosystem. And if you look at this, it's no longer Apple by itself with the iPhone. If you read the history of the decision-making process that Apple went through to open up its API back in 2007, the decision-making process that Facebook went through to open up its API about the same time, it's a major rethinking of the notion of we as a company can do everything ourselves versus we want to build a business system where we're the platform and we've got 500, 600,000 folks who plug into us. So when we talk about the word platform, we're talking about this as really the necessary piece. And there's a lot of definition that comes into here. This is not simply a simple connection. There's a lot of legal, workflow, technological issues that go into that. But I just want to give you kind of the overview. So Gang of Four is, if you look at the market cap of the largest four technology companies, this is them: Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. They all have this platform architecture. And it's been prevalent. So we have a 10-year roadmap that we can look at from outside of healthcare to begin to look at lessons of what works and what doesn't work in healthcare. For the most part, healthcare IT architecture has still been in that product model where everything is done by one company. It's a closed architecture. You can't get into it. And if you want to build an interface to it, it's usually a one-on-one interface. You're going to charge for it. If you want to connect to Epic, the first thing you got to get them to do is to answer the phone. Then 6 months later, you'll pay $100,000, and you can't do anything with it here. As contrast to where on the iPhone or my Android system, my wife has an iPhone, and I have an Android. I want a weather app. I can pick from, the Weather Center. I can pick from, I like WeatherBug, or there's a half a dozen others that are swappable. That's the notion of platform and the innovation that platforms tend to bring. So what's wrong with today's electronic health records? Well, what's wrong is really the whole concept of what electronic health records were conceived to be. They grew up in an era where the point here of an electronic health record was simply documentation. And it was a way of maximizing billing for the doctors so that they could upcode. Electronic health records did not start as collaboration tools. And so I'm going to be pretty neutral on this whole area. 2 years ago, when I spoke to Healthcare Unbound, I made a grievous error, and I apologized for it last year. My assumption 2 years ago had been that EHRs would evolve to become the platform for healthcare IT. And while I think that is still a possibility, that probably less so, I think that every day. And I'll come back and talk about that a little bit more. But what's going on is a tremendous change. And what I'm seeing is some of the EHR companies are getting it, where they're opening up their APIs. They're trying to turn into platforms. It's not an easy job. And others are still very much dug into the mentality, the mindset, the business model of, we're a product, we really don't want to connect with anybody. Tomorrow's platform is going to be designed differently. It's going to be designed with workflow in mind, sharing information right from the beginning. The new world of EHRs puts the puts the platform really in the middle, and the EHRs has been on the trailing edge here. It's really designed to serve hospitals and healthcare providers. The data exchange that needs to occur among a much broader group of folks than just hospitals. So I'll pose a question, and you can have your own answer. My sense is most people have not even thought about this question, but over time, it becomes increasingly important. Is health IT productization, or the notion of how the industry has been built around a closed architecture with expensive one-off interfaces that are difficult and expensive to build, and in many cases the owner doesn't want to build them, is that kind of productization sustainable for the future? Does that get us to the vision of accountable care? And we'll make the case, here's what you would have to believe to think that the notion of productization is a viable model for the future. Well, one is, one company can develop all the needed functionality. Okay, let's go back to looking at what we found with Apple and with Facebook and with Google, and where the tech world doesn't have quite the ego of believing that they can do it all. And if what Steve Jobs recognized is, there are a lot of things out there, these apps that we've never dreamed of. We can't create them all. Okay, that's the mindset you would have to believe. Do you believe there is one company out there that can do it all? Do you believe that health IT will become a winner-take-all marketplace, where I probably need to introduce the sort of the veiled comments here about Epic as sort of the antithesis of what we're talking about here, of what platforms need to be. I think many people read that the single-payer market is sort of the end play for Epic as success. And under that scenario, it would be logical to have one large productized information technology for the entire country. Okay? If you believe we're going to become a single payer necessarily, and that health IT will become a winner-take-all marketplace, then I think a productization strategy could be viable. Okay, personally, I don't see that in the cards today. So we're really stuck with a pluralistic system where there aren't going to be one winner. We're going to have different players in different markets, and clearly antitrust laws are encouraging people to be competing as opposed to one take it all. The third thing that you would have to believe is that optimal collaboration can be achieved through phone, paper, and fax. So if you're a product platform and you may not have that particular application, the workaround is what we've been doing today. So I find Shahid finds all three of these things largely unbelievable. So we come to a logical conclusion that interoperable platforms are a must-have. And someday we hope Epic will be opening up its API, and instead of charging $100,000, we'll see an Epic model where you can pick from 12 WeatherBug or 12 clinical decision support applications. We're not there yet today. Okay, the implications here are staggering of what this implies, and I'll just give you a couple of examples. For care providers, and here I'll specifically reference Epic again. Okay, you are destined to have a number of oh-spit moments over the next couple of years, if you already haven't had them. One is a recognition that I am going to need to be able to exchange data beyond my enterprise, which isn't the mindset of hospital systems today. They're building private HIEs. The second realization you're going to have is that my current IT architecture really isn't architected for me to be able to exchange data. and you're kind of stuck with it. You know, it's almost a marriage if you're a hospital. And a third realization, and I'll talk with you about my dream, is not only are you going to be expected to exchange health information across your boundaries, but you're going to want to. And I'll give you some examples of some business models and clinical cases. It's the right thing, we know, to exchange information and to exchange health data. But if that were sufficient, we'd be doing that today. You know, so what my thesis is it's really the business models that have been holding us back. For health plans, your business strategy is really dependent upon the availability of clinical data and analytics. You've seen Optum buy, boy, I may get these wrong, Axolotl, and Aetna bought Medicity for $500 million. The CEO of Aetna says we're really not a health insurance company, we're a health information company. Their business model has become dependent upon having data be very liquid. Can you achieve that without a platform architecture? So they're becoming much more key players. Third, investors. You know, there's a lot of market capitalization in some of the private health IT companies, and we make the challenge. It's not a matter of whether, or it's a matter of when. You know, they're going to have to open up. We're seeing examples of that. Tremendous implications for potential shift of market capitalization away from traditional EMRs and toward companies, which might be the EHRs themselves, that are going to be actually building the platforms. And the basis of competition is going to shift. I'll talk more about this later. The mindset, the culture, you know, the gut beliefs of, you know, where today we don't want to share data. We might violate HIPAA. We think of it as our asset. You know, the doctor hasn't approved Dorothy's information. You know, there's all these reasons why we don't. We're moving to an era, again, where, and the thesis is, we want to be able to share data. It will be necessary. So let's talk about some key characteristics of platforms, and I'm going to break it down, give you some quick examples. Overall, not a clear picture. It's going to be a mosaic. They're going to look different in different sectors, pharma, medical device, ACOs, and from region to region. So don't expect a very clear picture here. But here are some of the characteristics that we want to be paying attention to, and I'm going to give you a brief description of them, okay? And give you, these are kind of the tools that you can begin to use to analyze what's going on in your particular sector of the world in relationship to platform development. This is an incredibly powerful piece of information, so let me walk you through it, because just glancing at the slide doesn't reveal it. Okay, so what this slide shows is the percentage of minutes of use among social networking sites. And if you go back to the year June of 2008, Facebook had, roughly 25%. And that's where, if I can find the right device here. Is that the, nope. Nope, that ain't it. Somewhere on here there's the red thing that I want. Okay, so just to point it out here, this is where I'm talking about here, where Facebook has 20% of the minutes of total use. And you come down here 2 years later, what you find is of percentage of use of social networking sites, Facebook is up at 95%. That's incredibly powerful. And what it demonstrates is something that we need to learn from the tech world. And it's a two-edged sword, but it's really talking about network effects. Where, why is Facebook valuable to you? Well, because your friends are on it. And if someone else wants to build a competing network, it becomes virtually impossible to try and change that. So, it's a very powerful effect. It's a unifying effect, but you got to get past the tipping point. And It's also a dangerous effect in the world of healthcare because of the antitrust issues. So we're going to see, a lot of give and take here. Where are there some potential examples of where this may begin to play out in healthcare? So, okay, I think that'll do it. Okay, a couple of examples where we see potential for this. One is SureScripts potentially in the e-prescribing market. Great foothold, great adoption. You look at their curve of adoption, it's growing very rapidly like a typical network effect. IDNs, integrated delivery networks in a regional market, will have a lot of that critical mass. There could be within subsectors platforms, for example, Qualcomm's 2Net in the consumer device connectivity market. That could become a standard for mobile health remote monitoring devices, or however you want to define the platform. Not a winner yet, but certainly the potential is there. Let's go on to the next one, geography. So you look at Facebook again, they're talking largely about international markets, and you look at eBay, it's the yard sale for the world. And you look at Amazon, and it is the store where you can go to buy, anything. Tend to be international markets, and we don't believe it'll be that way in healthcare for the most part. Healthcare is still very local, and we expect to see platforms developing. Think of them as accountable care platforms, perhaps, that will combine the participants in a local marketplace. Healthcare markets are still mostly regional, less so national and international. Okay, where will they emerge from? 2 years ago, as I pointed out, I thought the natural incumbent was electronic health records. And what I'm seeing is, frankly, a lot of the EHR companies are, for reasons beyond me, they're trying to build all the meaningful use to capabilities themselves. There are a few, and I'll mention them by name, that I think have a different mindset, where they have opened up their APIs, and there's at least one here at the conference. Practice Fusion's opened up an API. Allscripts Helios. Who else am I missing? Greenway recently made an announcement about opening up their API. Cerner, I think, has the mindset, has opened up part of their API towards PHRs. This is kind of what we would expect to see. Folks who are breaking away from the pack. It could be EMRs, but it could be workflow software vendors. It could be a social network. Keep an eye on the HIE software vendors. That market is really ripe for consolidation, where unlike the market in hospitals and ambulatory care, you got hundreds of vendors. On the HIE software market, and I probably would frankly put my bets there, you've got 5 vendors who have most of the market share. If those folks could get and work together, that's where we would see the tremendous potential for disruption. So where platforms are going to emerge from, we don't know. It could be the EMR. Again, it's happening differently in different marketplaces. Okay, platforms contain multiple functionalities, and this is a list of what those functionalities are. And it's not meant to be exhaustive, but it's functional. But the structure is that these platforms are likely to evolve as hierarchies. We're not going to see one platform that does everything. And examples of things that are emerging in the marketplace. Again, Qualcomm, 2Net, a remote monitoring platform. When they announced they were there with 40 companies that were working with their API. Another interesting one to watch, I think, is the new joint venture between GE and Microsoft, where a lot of people are skeptical about that, but I think it's worth watching. They describe themselves as a population health platform. That's ambitious. They're going to open up their API. Definitely one to keep a mind on. So, example here, the wording at the bottom. So we got this here. This is the National Health Information Network. We got mobile platforms, remote monitoring platforms, chronic disease. It can go down different levels. And all these ultimately, we believe, will connect and will need to connect. But think hierarchies. Other important characteristics. Will it be walled garden platforms like Apple, yeah, there's a lot of good reasons why that's a powerful model, and I'll save the details of that. Or will it be more open platforms like Android, or in the case of healthcare, more state-based or community-based health information exchanges? You know, we see all of those. The main thing is to get away from the productization model. Who will be the sponsors? It can be one or more companies, expect consortia, government. You know, my read is what the government is doing in putting out this request for information for a governance structure is essentially trying to take a leadership stance on defining a national platform. They can't mandate it, but I give them credit for taking a leadership role. And platforms are going to be very dynamic. The picture is going to change from moment to moment. Don't think snapshot, think movie. Opportunistic, unlocking patient value and competitive advantage. Okay, openness, and that's a whole nother discussion. Again, this is the preview of the blog series and the book I'm going to be writing. So all I can do is kind of give you the thesis and the headlines. I will very much appreciate your pushback and your support, because there's a lot of ideas here. I think of this as sort of, it's the year 1995, and someone wants to write a book on what the internet is going to do to our culture and our economy. So, you know, this is sort of how I'm thinking about my book of this is what we are going to move from the era of hoarding information to sharing information and what it's going to look like. So, question, is this you? Okay, how many of you recognize this thing? You laugh. Okay, this, for those of you who are not quite as old as I am, this is a Wang word processor. This was really a cool device back in the early 1980s. And when this was introduced, the secretaries or the administrative assistants were thrilled. This was a $10,000 gizmo that did nothing but word processing. It was connected to a printer. It had a 10-inch disk, but all those 10-inch disks could do would be to take data from one word processor to another. So what happened here? The lesson I want to lead you is this is essentially a closed architecture, a $10,000 word processor that does nothing but word processing. It was disrupted by the personal computer, where what used to be $10,000 essentially becomes integrated, or you could even look at it as free, as part of a technology for competing with you. You know, the question here is, you know, what if somebody came along tomorrow and offered 100% of what you are doing for free? Okay, that's the difficult competitive question. So how do we go from hoarding to sharing? I want to give you a picture of how this is going to evolve and what we've seen in other industries. 3 phases of industry evolution. Okay, the default is closed. You know, 2 people to decide, one guy in Tuscaloosa and a guy in Warsaw decide to invent word processing programs back in the early 1980s. Okay, there's no reason to expect that there would be any kind of interoperability or even similarities among those word processing programs. So when technologies are developed, they start by default as being closed. Secondly, now we are in an area of what I want to describe for you as involuntary openness, where, and this can occur in a number of ways, where you put yourself again in the shoes of the EMR vendor, where your business model for the last 10 years has been built upon closed technology. You know, charging for the interface, high lock-in. You tend to look at anything that's open as challenging your current position. So there's a resistance to that. You look at the feedback, for example, that was given to the American Hospital Association about including or sharing data with patients. And they wrote back 50 pages, and I'm empathetic with their point of view about how difficult it is. But what I want to leave you with is how much resistance there is to this. And so how does this begin to open up? Well, you see industry standards, initiatives, government initiatives, open source competition, and you see companies breaking from the pack. And we're beginning to see that in healthcare. Where we are headed is an era of not only will we have to share data, but we will want to share data because our customers are going to force us to do that. And I won't have time to give you sort of the analytical answer today, but this is where I want to connect back with Dorothy, where we all understand the intuitively the value of information. You know, metaphorically, think of the information as the water behind a dam putting tremendous pressure, you know, ready to burst. The logjam is going to break. It's just a matter of time. So my dream is, you know, we get beyond what we are in today where, yeah, okay, I'll share information with you, but I still don't really want to where, gosh, I recognize not only do I need to, but I want to share information. So how does this happen? Again, I can give you examples. There are 10 here in an article that I wrote for Accountable Care News, why I believe in the long run an open platform will be the ideal choice for an accountable care organization. And my list is probably closer to 20 right now, and I'm welcoming other examples. I can't go through this with you entirely, but I'll walk through one and hopefully pique your thinking about where things will be different under models of accountable care. Significant patient leakage out of your ACO network. And that's actually built into the Medicare model of ACOs. What that means is that if you are a hospital or doctor in a community, you have patients who are seeing competitors. And the Maine HIE, for example, actually did a study, and they found that in different counties, 35 to 70% of the patients had medical record information in more than one health system. So there's a lot of leakage that's going on. Now, think through the implications of that. You are now in a shared savings model with your competitors. And if they don't take good care of your patients under your Medicare ACO for which you're accountable, that you're going to take the hit financially. So my belief is that changes the economics 180 degrees. Now you want your competitor to have the clinical information on that patient's CAT scan that occurred in their emergency room or your emergency room the night before. It's a whole 180-degree shift. Simply one example, more to come. I don't also have time to go over this here, but just the headline is value is created differently in a network economy. And we've seen that precedent in non-healthcare organizations. We're going to see it in healthcare very shortly. So some of the action items. What do we do about all this? Accountable care will require platforms. In the EHR era, if you go back to what were EHRs built for, EHRs are perfectly adequate for the early phases where the focus is on independent care and integrated care. EHRs by themselves are insufficient when you start to think about moving data around and sharing that data, and not only sharing the data, but sharing the workflow. The action items and next steps. Shahid has 5 here. Review your contracts. I'll go over some of these in a little more detail. Improve procurement. Promote platform neutrality. Invest in storage. Improve data liquidity. One is review your contracts. Have any of you sat down and actually, for those of you who have patient data that's held by an outside vendor, have you ever actually looked at the restrictions that you have on data? Chances are, and this is another OSPIT moment people have, is when you realize you want to share information, your health IT vendor also looks at that information as their own information. So this is where you got to first sit down with your lawyers, look through it. Again, now we're getting very, very tactical and granular. Improving procurement, adding language to your RFIs. The key simple point, or the first starting point, is data portability, where the data must become separated from the applications. The data and the applications. I want weather, but I don't want to be tied to one weather application. I can choose multiple ones. That's the reason why we have such lock-in in today's world of health IT, because the data and the applications are all locked together. It's virtually impossible to switch from one vendor to another. Promoting platform neutrality, best-of-breed product selection, etc. After governance, focus on storage. And Shahid suggests, this may sound counterintuitive, but don't worry about today. Storage is pretty cheap, and it's going to get cheaper. Err on the side of storing everything. Put that data into a repository, whether it's structured and unstructured. The personal analogy here on a personal level is try a program called Evernote, where it becomes simply a repository of everything in your life, and it becomes a search engine where you can gather that data and pull it out. The takeaways here. Again, to recap, we believe platforms and today's current IT architecture, not only will it be nice to have, it's a must-have. Today's architecture can't get us there. There are many characteristics. Watch out for network effects. It's opportunistic, where today's era of involuntary, I don't really want to share data, I don't really want to work with you, is going to yield to an era of, gosh, here's my information, I want you to have it, it's appropriate, this is the world that we are moving towards. And then I've shared with you some action items. So let me finish up here and just kind of give you the wrap up on what happened with Dorothy. Okay, good news. At least I thought it was good news. And Dorothy is a civil rights advocate, but this could have been a business person. This is really not meant to have, and I think one of the strengths of health IT is that it really doesn't have, the political divisiveness that most other issues in our economy do today. It's not a Republican or a Democratic thing. Anyway, the criminal trespassing charges were dropped, and the article alludes to a settlement that occurred between Dorothy as she did a civil suit. We don't know what the results of that were, but Dorothy was vindicated. With that, I will thank you for your attention. Satish, do we have time for questions, or is that it? Okay, one or two questions, and then I'll be introducing Dr. Mostashari. Farzad, are you here? Yeah. Okay, great. Question.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that Dorothy's story, and also from your perspective of IT and the information system in the U.S. environment. One country that solves it absolutely is, I just came back from a year of travel in India, where the majority of the healthcare record is still on paper world, but guess who owns that healthcare record? Patients. When they finish seeing the patients, the physician's hospital basically hand the record back to the patients. And so in that sense, my challenge to you is not so much it's a system. You need to look at your HIPAA compliance law. I've been dealing with healthcare from all aspects of this whole thing, from top to bottom, and I can guarantee you, from the provider standpoint, from the institution standpoint, their number one concern is their legal liability from the open source. It's not technology. We all can see that technology could accomplish this. Is the legal aspect of it.
Yeah.
On every record, that typical deadline that I've seen is
So Shakespeare was right. First, let's kill all the lawyers.
Unlike the password that leaked out by Google recently, they don't get mine. Every healthcare institutions, their records get fined per record.
So I guess, I fully recognize that I'm sharing with you a high vision. There's a lot of details and a lot of good reasons and logic why the system is today, or at least understandable in HIPAA. Thanks for pointing out the difference in thinking in India. I kind of like that. At least it says rethink some of the assumptions that we've had. One more question, Pat?
Great talk. The question I have is thinking about this migration, close to the open to something else, and thinking about big organizations like Kaiser who spent billions of dollars and have this closed system that seems to be working. Do you think they'll end up migrating, or is this something that will happen outside of the big organized systems where they're already making these gigantic investments?
Working as my discipline again is kind of strategic planning and strategic thinking, and it's more useful to think of not being a fortune teller and saying it's going to go one way or another, but thinking of different scenarios. And when there is uncertainty, as there is today, I've never seen more uncertainty in the 30 years I've been in healthcare. My answer to that is I really don't know, and I can offer an opinion. What I see in the culture of many of these companies, of the EMRs, who are certainly in the hospital and in the doctor world very central, some of them are very entrenched. I really have a hard time seeing Epic ever opening up its API. But you look at Allscripts, Tolman, the CEO, they got on board. Most of the EMR companies have changed their mindset, and many of them are now opening up their technology. So, let's continue to push, and create the vision, collectively that this is where we need to go.